My name is Rachel Whitaker. I'm 39 years old, and I thought signing the divorce papers would be the worst part. Turns out, I was wrong. Because 1 week after our divorce was finalized, I got a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Just thick ivory cardstock, gold lettering, and their names, wrapped in ribbon like a punchline. My ex-husband was marrying my sister. And they wanted me to know it not because they cared, but because they didn't. Have you ever been handed proof that your absence was the plan all along? Drop a comment if you've ever had to smile while someone else tried to rewrite your life like you were a typo. Let me show you what it feels like when a family invitation isn't an invitation at all. I didn't recognize the envelope at first. It was cream-colored, heavier than usual mail, and sealed with gold foil. No return address, no handwriting, just my name typed in elegant block print. For a second, I thought maybe it was a delayed sympathy card. Something from my dad's old coworkers or one of the hospice volunteers. But when I slid it open, the truth hit like cold air off a slammed door. Join us in celebrating the love story of Tessa Whitaker and Brandon Morton, my sister, and my ex-husband. They even included a tiny dried flower between the folds, like the kind you'd press into a journal to preserve a memory. There was no memory I wanted preserved. My fingers moved before my brain did, flipping to the RSVP section. But there wasn't one. Just a line that read, "Formal celebration, dress to impress." No date to respond by. No email. Not even a phone number. It wasn't an invitation, it was a declaration. I sat down hard on the edge of the kitchen chair, the legs creaking beneath me. My tea had gone cold on the counter. Tessa had always loved drama. Big gestures, surprise announcements, throwing sparkles on secrets and calling them confetti. I used to cover for her when we were kids, take the blame when she snuck out, lie to mom about where she'd been. I didn't think I was building a habit. Apparently, I was. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Tessa's colors are blush and navy. Just a heads up, in case you want to avoid clashing in the photos." No greeting. No explanation. I read it twice before realizing she thought I was going. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe that was the point. I didn't reply. I just stared at the thick paper still in my hands. It smelled faintly like perfume. Something floral and expensive. Not Tessa's usual vanilla body spray. Maybe it was Brandon's new scent of choice. I hated that I even thought that. Across the room, a picture frame tilted against the bookshelf. Me and my dad in the garden, years ago. I'd been 19, in overalls, dirt on my face, holding up a tomato like it was a trophy. My father had his hand on my shoulder. That's the part that stuck. He would have hated this. He'd worked so hard to keep the peace, even as his health failed. He'd asked us, begged us to stay a family. But peace built on silence is just a pretty word for surrender. And I wasn't surrendering anymore. I folded the invitation and slipped it into the same drawer where I kept the finalized divorce papers. Not in a fit of rage. Not to burn it later. Just to file it. Because some things don't deserve fire. Some things deserve a record. A minute later, I opened that drawer again and slipped in my mom's text, too. Evidence, I thought. Of what, I didn't know yet. But my gut told me I'd need it. The kettle clicked behind me, auto shut-off humming in the quiet. I poured fresh water over the old tea bag. Some things can be steeped again. Some can't. I didn't plan to drive past the house. It just sort of happened. I was running late to a tutoring session at the library, and the GPS rerouted me because of roadwork. Next thing I knew, I was turning down Ridgeview Lane. The tires slowed all on their own. It had only been a few weeks since I moved out, but everything already looked settled. Like they'd been planning this long before I left. New flower beds lined the front porch. The shutters had been painted a dusty blue. And the mailbox, the one I'd repainted after Dad's stroke, when he insisted it still sagged to the left like his bad eye, was replaced with a sleek black one, bolted perfectly straight. I pulled over across the street and cut the engine. From this angle, you could see everything. The porch swing swaying in the wind. The sheer white curtains in the living room. The side gate I used to slip through when I forgot my keys. And then I saw at the upstairs window. My window. Except it wasn't mine anymore. The glass was open slightly, just enough to let the breeze in. And behind it? A white ring light, the kind used for makeup tutorials or live streams. A blush-colored vanity table. And leaning against the back wall. A vision board. Covered in cut-out magazine quotes. Build your empire. You are your brand. Surround yourself with your future. I didn't need to squint to know whose future that was. Tessa had moved into my old bedroom. She hadn't just taken the house. She'd taken the walls I cried against after Dad died. The room I'd painted twice, first seafoam green, then a soft gray when I wanted something calmer. The closet door Brandon had kicked during our first fight about his long hours that turned out to be her. She was sleeping where I used to dream. I looked down and realized my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. A knock on the car window startled me. I turned, heart thudding. It was Mrs. Darnell. From 2 doors down, her fluffy white dog was straining at the leash. She smiled, friendly but puzzled. "Hey, Ray. I thought you still lived here?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out right away. "No," I finally said. "Not anymore." She blinked. "Oh, well, Tessa said you were just visiting family out of state." I nodded, lips tight. "Something like that." Heaven for... She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe apologize, maybe not, but the dog barked, tugging her down the sidewalk. I sat back in the driver's seat, numb. Then I remembered something. Behind the side yard fence, there was a loose paving stone. I used to hide spare keys there. Once, I carved my initials in it during a thunderstorm when I was 16 and furious at everyone. I needed to see if it was still there. I stepped out of the car and crossed the street, heart pounding even though I knew no one was home. Brandon's truck wasn't in the driveway. Tessa's car was gone. I slipped through the gate and walked toward the edge of the garden. Most of the landscaping had been changed. The peonies were gone. The little ceramic frog Dad had stuck in the mulch was missing. But the stone? Still there. I knelt and brushed dirt from the surface. There they were. Faint, but still visible. RW. All lost, and, under it, a jagged line, my angry attempt at a lightning bolt. A laugh caught in my throat. It came out more like a breath. They'd covered the walls. Replaced the windows. Painted over every color I ever chose. But they forgot this. I ran my fingers across the grooves. The edges were worn, but not erased. Not yet. I stood slowly, brushing my hands off on my jeans. No one came outside, no neighbor shouted, no alarm blared. And still, I felt like I'd trespassed. Maybe I had. Not legally. Emotionally. Because standing here, in the place where I used to bake birthday cakes and cry on the back steps and drag home Sunday groceries, I didn't feel like the owner anymore. I felt like the ghost. I walked back to the car without looking back. But before I got in, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the stone. Not to post. Not to send. Just to have. Because the world they were building had no space for my name. But this? This was mine. And if they ever tried to argue that I had no place here, well, I had the rock to prove otherwise. A week later, I got an email from a law office I didn't recognize. No subject line. Just a name. Baldwin and Hunt Probate Services. At first, I thought it was spam. I get legal newsletter junk all the time now that I teach estate literacy courses. But then I opened it. Dear Miss Rachel Whitaker, it began. Per recent revisions to the estate plan of Mr. Brandon Morton, we are notifying you as a listed secondary beneficiary in his will. Should you wish to receive a copy of the amended document or appoint counsel for review, please contact our office within 14 days. I stared at the screen. A will? Brandon had added me to his will? I checked the date. It had been filed 9 days after our divorce was finalized. 9 days. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my laptop. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some clerical mix-up, old paperwork being refiled. But this wasn't from years ago. This was fresh. Intentional. I clicked the PDF link attached and scrolled. There it was, in black and white legalese, a clause stating I was to receive a symbolic portion of shared sentimental assets as an acknowledgement of continued respect and familial bond. Sentimental assets. Continued respect. Like he was naming me in his will to… what? Apologize? Show maturity? Or worse, keep me tied to him, under some illusion of grace. My tea steeped too long in the kitchen. I didn't notice until the air smelled bitter. I didn't reply to the email. I just forwarded it to myself and filed it in a folder called Inheritance Disputes, Personal. Then I texted my mom. Did Brandon tell you he added me to his will? Her response came 2 minutes later. He's just trying to keep things civil. Be the bigger person. Maybe take it as a peace offering. There it was. The Maryland classic. Turn the blade and call it kindness. I typed out a dozen different replies from sarcastic to seething but deleted each one. Instead, I texted back. Noted. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just staring at that email. The tone was neutral. Polished. Probably drafted by someone 3 desks away from Brandon, someone who didn't know my name meant anything more than a placeholder on a form. But it felt like being gift-wrapped into someone else's PR. Like he wanted to look good while making sure I stayed in the background, not erased, just blurred. I closed the laptop and walked to the shelf where I kept the old family albums. The one on top had a cracked leather spine. Inside were Christmas photos from 10 years ago. Tessa in red flannel, Brandon in a beanie, Dad with his oxygen tank pushed to the corner of the frame so he wouldn't look sick. One picture stopped me. Me and Brandon in the kitchen. I was laughing, holding a pie dish. His hand was on my waist. We looked like a couple, like a unit. But I remember exactly what happened after that photo. We fought in the garage about him missing my dad's physical therapy session. He said he forgot. I knew better. That night, Tessa brought him leftovers from dinner. I didn't think anything of it back then. She always played peacemaker. Now I wonder. I snapped a photo of the picture with my phone, then slipped the album back in the drawer. I wasn't going to keep arguing with my memory. I had enough evidence in the present. Later that night, I got a message from Brandon himself. No greeting, no subject. Just this. Didn't want you to be caught off guard. Just wanted you to know I still respect what we had. Respect. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because nothing I said would land in the way I meant it. And because silence, sometimes, is the most honest language you can use. I opened a blank page in my digital journal and wrote. He didn't name me in the will to honor me. He did it so I'd stay civil. Stay small. Stay tethered to a version of events that makes him look generous instead of guilty. Then I saved it, time-stamped, and backed it up. Not because I planned to share it. But because a record, even a quiet one, matters. And because people like Brandon don't lie by accident. They lie with purpose. Which means every compliment might be a clause. And every gift might be a leash. I waited a few days before pulling the folder back out. Not because I forgot, but because I needed space to look at it with new eyes. Detached eyes. When I finally did, it was late. The kind of night when the air feels too still and the fridge hum sounds louder than it should. I spread the papers out across my kitchen table. A light breeze came through the open window, lifting the edges just slightly like even the house was holding its breath. The deed transfer was on top, dated 3 months before Dad passed. A few lines, a few numbers. It looked official until it didn't. Something about the signature. Marilyn Whitaker, it read, in her careful, old-school cursive. But it didn't curl the way hers always did. The W looked forced. The spacing between the letters too perfect, too even. Almost like someone had tried to copy it from a checkbook. I reached for the envelope where I kept birthday cards. I had dozens. Mom always sent them, even when things were tense. She loved signing them in ink, always adding a little heart after her name. I pulled out 3. Held them up. The signatures didn't match. The M in her cards curved inward, like a soft hook. On the deed? It was stiff, angled. I held my breath. One card even had a smudge where her hand slipped, like she'd signed it while the ink was still wet. You don't get that from a forgery. But this one on the deed? It was clean. Too clean. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. She wouldn't fake it. Would she? I called her the next morning. Asked if she wanted to meet at Barlow's Cafe, our old neutral zone. We hadn't been in months. She said sure, like nothing was wrong. When I got there, she was already sipping tea at the corner booth, stirring in a little honey the way she always did. The waitress smiled when she saw me, like we were regulars. "Still drink it black?" she asked. I nodded, even though I didn't feel like coffee. I sat down across from Mom, the folder in my bag like a lead weight. We talked small. Weather. My cousin's new baby. The price of eggs. Then I leaned in. "Mom," I said softly. "Do you remember when you signed over the house to Tessa?" Her spoon clinked against the cup. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "It was months ago, Ray. When everything was happening with your dad, we all agreed it was simpler that way." I kept my voice level. "I just don't remember anyone mentioning it. Not to me." She stirred again. "Too long. It wasn't meant to be a big deal," she said. "You were going through so much." I pulled the deed out of my bag and slid it toward her. "Do you remember signing this one?" She glanced at it a flicker, not a real look, then pushed it gently back toward me. "I don't need to see the paperwork," she said. "It's all handled now." There it was. The soft refusal. The polite deflection. My mom's signature move. I didn't press her. Not in public. But I marked the moment. Because when someone avoids eye contact, and their spoon keeps stirring long after the honey's dissolved, they're not avoiding the topic. They're avoiding what it'll cost to admit the truth. When we finished, she gave me a hug. Said, "Let's not make this a thing." And I nodded, even though it was already a thing. On the way home, I stopped at the mailbox and pulled out a stack of grocery ads, a community newsletter, and a padded envelope from an office supply store. Inside, ink pads. Legal grade. 2 colors. I planned to test every signature. Not to trap anyone. Just to confirm what I already knew deep down. The person who signed that deed wasn't my mother. Not the one who raised me, anyway. Maybe it was the version who wanted things to be easier. Who thought silence was a form of love. But silence isn't love. It's just the quietest kind of permission. I wasn't even looking for it. I was scrolling through my phone late one night, half reading headlines, half checking the weather for the weekend when Tessa's post appeared. Her face filled the screen. Soft lighting, perfect angles, bare shoulders, and a blush silk robe. The caption read, "To all the women who had to become their own rescue plan. You are not alone. I've lived through grief, betrayal, and the weight of holding a family together in silence. But healing isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just knowing when not to engage. Boundaries, self-worth, soft strength." A quote card was tucked into the carousel. Scripted font on a watercolor background. Some people leave quietly. Others rewrite the ending after they go. She'd tagged Marilyn. And Brandon. Not me. The comments were full of heart emojis and prayers and, "You're so brave, Tessa." One said, "I knew something was off with your sister. You always deserved better." She liked it. I didn't breathe for a minute. It wasn't just the words. It was how calculated they were. Vague enough to be safe, specific enough to do damage. I clicked on her profile. Scrolled back. There were more. From the week after the divorce, from before I even knew they were getting married. Each one framed her as someone who had reclaimed peace and let go of those who don't respect your worth. There was a picture of her and Brandon, laughing in front of a vineyard. The caption read, "Sometimes, the heart chooses differently than the timeline would suggest, and that's okay." It had nearly 2,000 likes. I opened my notes app and typed one word. Narrative. Then I took screenshots. All of them. One by one. Not to post. Not to fight. To save. To document the performance. Because people like Tessa didn't lie directly. They curated. They crafted a version of the truth with just enough empty space for others to fill in the villain. And they counted on me to stay silent. Because that's what I'd always done. Even when she borrowed clothes and didn't return them. Even when she let Brandon flirt with her in front of me and said I was too sensitive. Even when she signed her name to things I built. I used to think it was sisterhood. Sacrifice. Loyalty. Now I knew better. The next day, I got a message from a woman I barely knew, someone I used to work with at the courthouse. It said, "Hey, awkward question. Are you okay? I saw some stuff floating around on Facebook and just wanted to check in." I replied, "What kind of stuff?" She sent me a screenshot of a private group post, someone mentioning a messy family estate situation and hinting that the older sister went off the rails. No names. But it didn't have to be specific. I knew what it meant. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I pulled up the document folder on my desktop and renamed it Narrative Theft. Inside, I saved all the screenshots, every text thread, every message where someone danced around the truth. I didn't write a rebuttal. I didn't craft a counter-narrative. I just archived the receipts. Because someday, when people ask why I did what I did, why I took things to court, why I didn't smile and sit quietly in the family photos, I'll show them this. Not out of revenge. But because silence, in the hands of people like them, isn't peace. It's PR. And I've spent too many years letting other people's captions become my story. Not anymore. I didn't go to the house to start anything. I just wanted the pie pans. The good ones, ceramic, cobalt blue, the kind Dad always used for sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving. They were tucked in the lower cabinet next to the fridge. I was sure of it. I'd left them there on purpose, thinking I'd be back. I hadn't been. And now it was late afternoon, cool and overcast, the kind of weather that makes you crave warm cinnamon and a clean kitchen. I parked at the curb and walked up the driveway slowly. Not like I was sneaking, just cautious. Like the ground might shift underneath me if I moved too fast. I reached for my key without thinking. Slipped it into the lock. And stopped. It didn't turn. I pulled it out, turned it over, tried again. Nothing. I jiggled the handle gently at first, then with more pressure. Still nothing. They'd changed the locks. No warning. No notice. No text that said, "Hey, just a heads up, new key code." Just a silent reminder. I didn't live there anymore. And I wasn't welcome. I stood there for a second, hand still on the doorknob. It felt cold. Thicker somehow, like even the air in front of the door knew I didn't belong. Then the door opened. Tessa. Perfectly done up as always, even in leggings and a cropped sweatshirt. Her hair in a loose bun, earrings sparkling just enough to say effortless. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "Ray. I didn't know you were coming by." I didn't step back. I didn't step forward either. "I just came to grab the pie pans," I said. "The blue ones. They're still in the cabinet, right?" She smiled, the kind of smile that's more about teeth than warmth. "I think I gave those to Goodwill. I didn't know you still wanted them." That hit harder than it should have. But I didn't flinch. I nodded once. "Got it." She looked at the keys still in my hand. "I meant to reach out," she said. "We had the locks changed for safety. Just with everything going on, you know how Brandon gets nervous about security stuff." A pause. Like she wanted me to say it's fine. Like she needed me to absolve her. I didn't. Instead, I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and took a photo of the lock. She blinked. "What's that for?" I slipped the phone away calmly. "Just for my records." Another pause. Then she stepped halfway into the doorway, one hand on the frame. "Well," she said, "I hope you're doing okay. You look tired." I smiled. A small, dry smile. "You'll let me know if you find the pans," I said. I turned and walked back down the steps. I didn't run, I didn't rush. But I felt something shift in me as I walked back to my car. Not rage. Not grief. Just a door finally closing in every way. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, staring at the house. The curtains were new. So was the wreath on the door. Fall-themed. Pumpkins and fake berries arranged just so. The kind of detail Tessa used to say was too much when I decorated. Now it was hers. I pulled up the photo of the lock, zoomed in, studied the new model, took a screenshot of the timestamp. Then I opened my notes app and typed one line. They closed the door. I'm walking through the paperwork. Not revenge. Just clarity. And sometimes, clarity looks a lot like quiet. Carmen Delgado didn't have a receptionist. Just a laminated walk-ins welcome. Ring bell once, sign taped to a narrow glass door, and the smell of burnt coffee drifting into the hallway. Her office was tucked between a cash advance place and an old shoe repair shop that hadn't updated its hours since 1998. I'd found her name through an old court directory, someone who used to handle probate overflow for the county. Quiet reputation. No website, no Yelp reviews. That made me trust her more. When I stepped inside, she looked up from her desk, nodded once, and said, "You must be the Whitaker case." Not a question. Just fact. She wore a dark green sweater and had her reading glasses pushed to the top of her head like a headband. Her desk was covered in two things: color-coded file tabs and empty Diet Coke cans. I sat down. She got right to it. "Okay, you brought copies?" I handed her a folder. She opened it, thumbed through the deed, the estate notifications, my screenshots, even the picture I'd taken of the changed lock. She didn't say much at first. Just kept flipping. Then she pulled out a legal pad and scribbled something down. "Who notarized this?" she asked, tapping the corner of the deed. I leaned in. "Not sure. The stamp looks local, but the date's weird." She nodded. "You're right. It's dated 4 days before your father passed. That's questionable if he was already nonverbal or medically unstable." "He was in hospice by then," I said. "Barely conscious." She underlined something on the page. "And your name's not listed anywhere as a witness. No notification, no consent signature?" I shook my head. "Then they've got a problem," she said, sitting back. A tiny burst of air left my chest, something between relief and grief. She reached for her mug. White ceramic. Faded lettering that read, "It's only over when the paperwork says it is." She sipped and added, "And this paperwork's not saying much in their favor." I stared at the desk, unsure if I should feel hopeful or horrified. Carmen watched me for a beat, then softened. "You're not trying to burn it all down, are you?" she asked. "You're just trying to make sure you weren't erased." I looked up at her. "I don't want revenge. I want a record." She nodded slowly. "That I can help with." "I say." She flipped open a drawer and pulled out a yellow sheet with bullet points on it. "First, we put a hold on the property title, nothing dramatic, just a quiet freeze. You're not evicting anyone, you're protecting your standing until we know what's real." She paused. "Second, I want you to check if your dad kept a legacy folder. Lockbox, safe, even a digital file. Sometimes older folks write letters, record video wills, or leave behind instructions that don't always get processed right away." I blinked. "He had a file cabinet in the shed. I thought most of it was tax stuff." "Go back," she said. "Don't touch anything else. Just look for your name, look for his handwriting. Sometimes what matters doesn't even look official at first." I nodded, absorbing the instructions like a student. Then I asked, "Should I tell them I'm doing this?" Carmen didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just said, "Would they have told you?" I didn't answer. She closed the folder and leaned forward. "You're doing this the right way. No noise, just the facts." I stood to leave. Before I reached the door, she said, "One more thing." I turned. She pointed to the envelope I'd brought in. "Don't lose that photo of the lock. That's not just a door. That's intent." I nodded. She waved me out with a flick of her pen. Back in the car, I stared at the steering wheel for a long moment before turning the ignition. For weeks, I'd been quiet because I didn't know what to say. Now I knew what to document. I parked 2 houses down. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want them to see me coming. The driveway was full. SUVs, a Lexus with pink balloons tied to the side mirror, even a catering van. A fall-themed brunch, based on the table setup I glimpsed through the hedges. Tessa never missed a seasonal Instagram moment. I waited in the car until the backyard noise confirmed it: clinking glasses, forced laughter, someone shouting, "Mimosas over here." Then I walked around the block and slipped in through the side yard gate. It was still broken, the latch rusted in place. Funny how they could replace locks and redecorate entire rooms, but this little gate stayed crooked. I kept to the edge of the yard, out of sight from the patio crowd. Music was playing soft, acoustic, curated for ambiance. No one noticed me. They never used to. The shed was where I remembered it, behind the lilac bushes my father planted after Mom's second almost divorce. He said lilacs made her stay. I eased the door open and slipped inside. Dust, dry leaves. The faint smell of gasoline and old rope. I hadn't been in here since Dad's funeral. Most of his tools were gone. The workbench had been cleared. But the filing cabinet, the old gray one with the dent in the bottom drawer, was still there. I crouched, heart thudding too loud, and opened the bottom drawer. Tax files. Bank statements. A folder labeled Ray, SCO Choel, loans in his handwriting. And, under that, a plain manila envelope. No label, no stamp. Just a folded edge with smudged fingerprints. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. And beneath that, a notarized document dated 6 months before Dad passed. I sat back on my heels. The letter was short. Ray, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. I wanted you to have the house. Not just because you took care of me. Because you never asked for anything. That was my mistake, waiting for people to ask. This is my answer. Dad. I pressed my fingers into the paper. His handwriting was messy, more loops than usual, but still him. The notarized page beneath it confirmed everything. Clear language. His signature. Witnessed by a neighbor I remembered from down the block. He hadn't forgotten me. He had chosen me. I folded the pages gently and slid them back into the envelope. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. That would come later. From outside, I heard a voice too close. "Do you think she'll come today?" a woman asked. Another voice replied, "Who, the sister? I thought they don't talk anymore." Laughter. "She's probably off sulking." I mean, wouldn't you be embarrassed? I didn't recognize either of them. That made it worse somehow. Strangers narrating my life like it was a deleted subplot. I stood slowly, tucked the envelope into my jacket, and stepped out of the shed. Brandon saw me first. He was standing near the grill, talking to a man I didn't recognize. His smile dropped for half a second before he recovered. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I walked straight past the table. Tessa was pouring cider into glass mugs, laughing at something. She didn't see me until I was nearly at the gate. Our eyes locked for one brief second. She tilted her head the same way she used to when we were kids, and I came home without my science trophy. Like she was trying to decide whether to look sorry or smug. I gave her neither. I walked out. No slamming. No shouting. Just a single truth tucked into my coat pocket. One they'd hoped I'd never find. But she forgot one thing. I keep things. I dressed like it was a job interview. Pressed black slacks, gray blazer, low heels. No lipstick. Just enough mascara to look awake. Carmen said. Judges like clean lines and quiet tones. I understood the subtext. Don't give them a reason to doubt your calm. Brandon and Tessa arrived 10 minutes late, all smiles and slow steps. She wore cream and pearls, like she was posing for a family trust commercial. He had on a navy suit, sleeves pushed up to the forearm just so like he wanted to appear both relaxed and responsible. We didn't speak. Carmen nodded at them but didn't stand. Just quietly laid out our folders, mine on the left, hers on the right, a single copy of my father's notarized statement in the center. When the judge walked in, everyone rose. Judge Drummond was a tall man with small glasses, and no time for pleasantries. He looked at the docket, then straight at us. "Let's begin." Entry. The attorney representing Tessa and Brandon stood first, polished, articulate. He opened with how the transfer of title had occurred with assumed consent, given Ray's physical absence from the home and her lack of formal contestation at the time. Carmen didn't flinch. She stood slowly and introduced our side. No drama. Just dates. Just facts. She presented the notarized document from my father. The letter, the timeline of hospice care. The deed. The lock change. My absence from the decision-making. The judge flipped through the documents. Brandon kept glancing at Tessa, who sat with her legs crossed and hands clasped like she was waiting to win an award. Then came the moment Carmen passed the original letter to the clerk handwritten, smudged at the corners. My father's voice, in ink. The judge read it silently. Then out loud. "Because you never asked for anything. That was my mistake." Waiting for people to ask. The room went quiet. Even Brandon's lawyer didn't move. Judge Drummond looked up at me. "Miss Whitaker, were you notified at any time that the title would be transferred?" "No, sir." "Were you given a chance to sign or consent?" "No, sir." Tessa shifted slightly, crossed her legs the other way. Her hands tightened in her lap. Then Brandon muttered under his breath. "She was supposed to burn that." Not loud, but loud enough. The judge heard it. He turned his head slowly. "Excuse me, Mr. Morton?" Brandon froze. His lips pressed into a flat line. The judge didn't repeat the question. He just looked at the clerk and said, "Please note the respondent's comment for the record." Then he straightened his papers. "I see no credible reason to doubt the authenticity of the letter or the notarized documentation presented. It is consistent with the timeline of medical decline and shows clear intent. Miss Whitaker has a legal claim not only to the property, but to the recognition of her father's stated wishes." He paused. "Transfer of ownership will be reversed. Miss Whitaker is now the sole legal title holder." No gavel bang. No dramatic sigh. Just a decision. Just a truth made official. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. Outside the courtroom, Carmen handed me the finalized paperwork. "Well done," she said. "You didn't flinch." That. I looked down at the folder in my hands, crisp, stamped, mine. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like a door opening that had been bolted shut for years. As we walked toward the exit, I passed Marilyn in the hallway. She hadn't come inside. She'd been sitting on the bench outside the courtroom, staring at the floor. She stood when I got near. "You didn't have to make it public," she said quietly. I looked at her. "No," I replied. "You did that the moment you stayed quiet." Zoo. And I kept walking. I didn't move in right away. For 3 nights after the court ruling, I slept on the pull-out couch in my apartment. Not because I was scared to return, but because I didn't want to walk back in like I was reclaiming something broken. I wanted to walk in like it had always been mine. On the 4th morning, I packed a single duffel bag and drove over. The house was quiet, still. You could smell the faint echo of old potpourri, lemon cleaner, and underneath it, the familiar scent of floorboards warmed by morning light. The title was mine now. But the silence? That still belonged to them. The mail was waiting in a stack inside the front door. Flyers. Credit card offers. One envelope addressed to current resident, probably junk. And one padded mailer. No return address. No handwriting. Just my name printed on a peel and stick label. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside, a USB flash drive. New note. New markings. I plugged it into my laptop with the kind of hesitation you get after a trauma, not fear, just the weight of knowing something might shift again. The video file was dated 4 months back. I clicked play. It opened in the backyard of this house, same bricks, same patio lights. Brandon's voice. I mean, I'll change the locks if I have to. She won't fight it. Ray never fights. She just disappears. Then Tessa's laugh. Honestly, I'd be more worried about the deed than her. She still thinks silence makes her noble. Brandon again. Well, she's about to find out it makes her invisible. I paused the video. Saturday perfectly still. Someone had recorded them. Quietly. And sent it to me. I didn't know who. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone at that brunch. It didn't matter. Because in those words, careless and caught, was everything I had felt but couldn't prove. I closed the file. Pulled the drive out. Slipped it into the drawer next to my father's letter. Later that afternoon, I checked the mailbox again. A single card. White envelope. My name in handwriting I recognized. Marilyn. Inside, a plain note card. No design, no flourish. Just one sentence. I see now that kindness can wear armor. No apology. No ownership. Just acknowledgement. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, walked into what used to be the guest room, now mine again, and opened the closet. The old dresser was still there. Top drawer. Buried under winter scarves and a pair of gloves. A fireproof folder with my own legal paperwork. I pulled it out, sat at the desk, and began making updates. New will. New medical power of attorney. Beneficiaries. A line that read, in the event of a dispute regarding this estate, refer to the original homeowner's handwritten documentation dated 6 months prior to his death, and the court ruling that followed. I printed it. Signed it. Dated it. Filed it away. Some people weaponize silence. Others document it. I opened the windows, let the breeze move through the hallway, and sat on the steps with a cup of coffee the way my dad used to. A neighbor waved from across the street. Welcome back, Ray. I smiled. Because I wasn't back. I was home. I wrote the post 3 times. The first version was sharp. Clean. Full of timelines and screenshots and a closing line that read, you can gaslight the world, but not the courts. The second version was softer. It opened with, I never wanted this to go public, but since it already did, and ended with a grainy photo of me and my dad, standing barefoot in the backyard, laughing. The third one I didn't finish. I just sat staring at the blinking cursor, the empty caption box, the quiet ache in my chest. Then I closed the app. Because I realized it wasn't for them. Not the internet. Not the people who whispered. Not the ones who clicked like under lies. It was for me. And I already knew the truth. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. Not on a holiday. Not on a birthday. Just a random, overcast Tuesday when the air smelled like dry leaves and something distant in the sky. His headstone was simple. Gray granite. Clean lines. No angel statues or grand etchings, just his name, 2 dates, and 1 line I chose without telling anyone. He never made noise, he just stayed. I stood there a long while, unsure what to say. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the old house key, the one that no longer fit any door. The one Brandon replaced. The one Tessa pretended I never had. I knelt and set it gently at the base of the stone. I kept it, I whispered. Even when they told me it didn't belong to me anymore. My voice cracked on belong. I didn't cry. But my throat tightened in that way grief always returns, not loud, just patient. I won. I said softly. You'd hate that word. But I did. The wind moved through the trees. A squirrel darted across the nearby path. I smiled, remembering how Dad used to say squirrels were just anxious birds that forgot how to fly. I sat down in the grass beside the headstone, pulled my knees to my chest, and for the first time in months, I let the silence stretch without trying to fill it. No posts. No comments. No need to prove or justify or explain. Just breath. Just space. Just me. Before I left, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small photo, the only one I'd taken from the house before everything changed. It was of the kitchen counter, sunlight falling across the pie pans. My hand was in the frame, mid-mix, a blur of flour and motion. Dad had taken it, said I always looked happiest when I wasn't thinking about being watched. I placed it beside the key. Not as a goodbye, just as a breadcrumb. A little piece of who I'd been, and who I still was. Back in the car, I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't post. I just drove home, windows cracked, music low. The wind smelled like something in between seasons. Like something was shifting. And I didn't need anyone else to feel it for me. The radiator in the hallway still hissed at night. It used to scare me as a kid, that slow, rattling breath right before the heat kicked in. I'd run down the hall to my parents' room, convinced something was creeping under the floorboards. Now, it just meant the house was warming up. I'd gotten used to its rhythm again, the way the floor creaked under the third stair, the slow drip in the laundry sink when the rain lasted more than a day. The way the kitchen settled after dark, like it was exhaling. I didn't change much after the ruling. I didn't knock out walls or repaint every room. I just brought my things back. Hung the wind chime from the side porch. Reshelved my books. Placed the photo of me and Dad, the one from the pie-making afternoon, in the hallway outside the guest room. I taught my online class again. The rhythm came back quicker than I thought. Woke up. Coffee. Emails. Graded assignments. Sometimes I'd go a whole day without thinking about Brandon or Tessa or even Marilyn. Sometimes. But peace doesn't erase memory, it just lets you set it down when it gets too heavy. The mail that morning was light, a utilities reminder, a recipe magazine I didn't remember subscribing to, and a small box with no return address. Inside was one item. The cobalt blue pie pan. The one I thought they donated. The one Dad always used first at Thanksgiving. No initials. Just the pan wrapped in brown paper and bubble wrap. I stood in the kitchen holding it for a long time, unsure whether it felt like an apology or a peace offering. Maybe it wasn't either. Maybe it was just returning to where it belonged. I washed it gently, ran my fingers along the crack on the bottom that had always looked like a question mark. Then I placed it on the shelf above the stove. Not as proof. Just because it was mine. That evening, a letter came from Marilyn. Not a card this time, a full-page letter in slanted handwriting. She wrote about the weather. The garden. How the neighbor's dog still barked at nothing. And then, in the final paragraph, I don't expect you to reply, but if you ever do, I'll read it twice. I folded it once, placed it in the drawer where I kept old birthday cards and receipts I couldn't throw away. I didn't feel angry. Just done. Later, as the sun slipped down behind the oak in the backyard, I opened the windows and let the breeze in. The house creaked once, like it always did right around dusk. That sound. The one I used to mistake for ghosts. Now it sounded like a house remembering me back.